So this is someone who is not going to be coming into Trump world without any information about some of the backstory. Now, probably very different issues here than in that case. But you can imagine after that conviction, Alan Weisselberg pled guilty to 15 counts. The Trump Organization found guilty on 17 counts. You can guess that Donald Trump is not going to like the fact that this is the same judge who is now presiding over his case, who presided over those cases as well.
There's been no indication that the judge will impose any sort of a gag order, but this has been part of the conversation in the public space, given the rhetoric that we have heard from Donald Trump, from fellow Republicans, from Trump supporters in the weeks and days leading up to this moment. Unlikely he'll impose that gag order unless he sees something along the way that alarms him?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that in this case there would be a gag order. It's possible. We've seen it in other high-profile political cases. Roger Stone's case is a good example where Roger Stone kept violating the gag order and the judge kept getting mad at him and threatening him, et cetera. I don't expect that to happen here. Gag orders are very much in the discretion of the judge. Now, you talked before about a camera in court. Actually, in New York State, it's very unusual to have a camera. They vary state to state, but it would have been a particularly unusual event to have a camera in the courtroom in New York State.
Now, the judge did acknowledge the history of this moment in making his decision, but he decided again, obviously agreeing with the Trump team on this one.
Right, and that is consistent with almost every other court in New York. Gag order, though, is really more within the discretion of the judge. There's less sort of history and precedent to look on and say, well, typically in the state of New York, we do this and this. A gag order is really going to be much more determined based on the facts, the nature of the crime, et cetera. But I don't expect that he's going to impose one because, you know, one person who would not be happy about that at all would be Donald Trump.
But of course, Donald Trump's team.
Right, that's why.
How do you put a gag order on a presidential candidate?
Obviously very true.
I mean,
but he will be watching, this judge, no doubt, what Donald Trump says at Mar-a-Lago hours from now, later today, and in the weeks that come. And certainly Donald Trump's legal team has told the former president, you have to be aware that you're now a criminal defendant. Your words will matter.
Well, and he's also been attacking the judge already. I mean, that's where he's got to get a little bit careful, is that, you know, you can attack the judge. OK, I think you can probably get away with attacking the judge. But if he starts, you know, attacking others, you know, if they get the name of a grand juror, or something happens that goes beyond the sort of typical name calling of a judge that you disagree with, you know, that could lead to some sort of change with regard to a possible gag.
I want to bring in Sarah Isgur. Yeah. She wants in on this conversation. Obviously worked during the Trump years in the Attorney General's office. And Sarah, to John Carl's point, there are real challenges when it comes to political speech and free speech in this country and any notion of a gag order.
Right. I mean, I think that a judge could put a gag order, for instance, on the address of the prosecutor or the judge, things like that. But when you're talking about a gag order that you cannot criticize here, a government employee by a candidate for president of the United States, that is such core protected First Amendment speech. I think that would not be upheld by another judge on appeal.
Sarah, thank you. Kate, we're also learning more about who traveled down in this motorcade today, though, in a separate vehicle.
That's what we're hearing. So two lawyers, Todd Blanche and Susan Neckles. Neckles was involved in the trial of the Trump Organization, so she is a known quantity, long-standing lawyer in this orbit. Blanche, brand new to this particular legal team, former federal prosecutor at the Southern District of New York. Interestingly, actually also the former office of current Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. He too was a former federal prosecutor in that office. Don't know if they cross paths, but this is a very seasoned former federal prosecutor, now defense attorney, who has now just joined the Trump team, and that seems like a significant development.
And if we could bring the Trump legal team image back up to the screen, I want to bring in Terry Moran on this, who has covered legal matters for many years as well. And Terry, this notion that in the last 24 to 48 hours, the adding of Todd Blanche, for example, to this legal team would seem to acknowledge on the part of the former president that this obviously is a Waiting, we believe, for the former president to come up and face the judge. And of course, our team there in the hallway reporting this out will know at any moment when the former president arrives. It's our understanding that, again, they're waiting for him, that he's undergoing processing in a different part of the building. And Aaron Katersky, he has officially surrendered, as any criminal defendant would, inside the building. And again, as we look at this live picture, Aaron, we now await the former president being brought upstairs in that elevator that is usually reserved for judges.
And what an extraordinary scene this is, David. I know we keep saying how unusual all of this is. It's not like this courthouse hasn't handled high-profile defendants. John Lennon's killer, Mark David Chapman, John Gotti, the mobster, made an appearance here. The football player, Plaxico Burress, Sean Puffy Combs, but never a former American president. And the entire hallway has been reconfigured. It has been off limits to us over the last couple of days while they tried to configure all of the movements, so we haven't been able to see what the hallway looks like until now. And ordinarily there's more freedom of movement, but every other court proceeding on the 15th floor has been halted, and many cases in the building on some of the other upper floors have been adjourned just to reduce the number of people who are present while the former president is inside.
Very interesting as you look live, the photographer, a very good photographer, getting a white balance there off a sign on the doorway. We'll go right back to that camera as soon as it's back up and running, because that is the live picture of the hallway. Reporters have told me now that the former president has not arrived on the 15th floor, so that's why this camera will be important as far as offering us a window into what's playing out inside criminal court. I want to bring back in Bob Boyce, former NYPD chief of detectives. And Bob, again, you know this building well. Take us through what's playing out right now. The president on another floor, and once they're done with him, they'll bring him up to this hallway here.
They will, David. And that's what you see up there is Secret Service standing in front of us, as well as court officers. NYPD is out of this by now. They're all outside. This is with the two agencies right now, Secret Service and court officers, and they have everything squared away. He'll come out of those elevators to our left and walk into the courtroom where those people are waiting for us. So we'll see him come out in a short amount of time and make his way with elevator back into the court.
Bob Boyce with us here. We're at the mercy of the
right now, Secret Service and court officers, and they have everything squared away. He'll come out of those elevators to our left and walk into the courtroom where those people are waiting for us. So we'll see him come out in a short amount of time and make his way with elevator back into the court.
Bob Boyce with us here. We're at the mercy of the
right now, Secret Service and court officers, and they have everything squared away. He'll come out of those elevators to our left and walk into the courtroom where those people are waiting for us. So we'll see him come out in a short amount of time and make his way with elevator back into the court.
Bob Boyce with us here. We're at the mercy of the
right now, Secret Service and court officers, and they have everything squared away. He'll come out of those elevators to our left and walk into the courtroom where those people are waiting for us. So we'll see him come out in a short amount of time and make his way with elevator back into the court.
Bob Boyce with us here. We're at the mercy of the
right now, Secret Service and court officers, and they have everything squared away. He'll come out of those elevators to our left and walk into the courtroom where those people are waiting for us. So we'll see him come out in a short amount of time and make his way with elevator back into the court.
Bob Boyce with us here. We're at the mercy of the
right now, Secret Service and court officers, and they have everything squared away. He'll come out of those elevators to our left and walk into the courtroom where those people are waiting for us. So we'll see him come out in a short amount of time and make his way with elevator back into the court.
Bob Boyce with us here. We're at the mercy of the
right now, Secret Service and court officers, and they have everything squared away. He'll come out of those elevators to our left and walk into the courtroom where those people are waiting for us. So we'll see him come out in a short amount of time and make his way with elevator back into the court.
Bob Boyce with us here. We're at the mercy of the
right now, Secret Service and court officers, and they have everything squared away. He'll come out of those elevators to our left and walk into the courtroom where those people are waiting for us. So we'll see him come out in a short amount of time and make his way with elevator bank into the court.
Bob Boyce with us here. We're at the mercy of the
to receive a copy of the indictment. I do not believe they've received it so far, according to my sources, but relatively shortly, I'm told the full legal team will join the former president, and very shortly, David, they will make that trip up to the 15th floor and head into that courtroom.
And it's your understanding, John, that it's Todd Blanche and Susan Neckles who were in that separate SUV who are now in this building with the former president?
I'm told all three, David, that we showed earlier to our viewers. Todd Blanche, Susan Neckles, and Joe Tacopina. They have become the three lawyers that are working very closely with the former president on this case. All three accompanied the former president down to that trip, and as we reported earlier, David, in a separate vehicle.
And there's no question, John, that behind the scenes, we've been talking about this juxtaposition of the political rhetoric and then the reality of being inside criminal court. There's no question that the former president understands the weight of what's playing out here.
Absolutely, David. I mean, even heading up last night from Florida, we know all the cameras trained on the plane. I'm told the former president was watching the coverage, and one of his aides used a strange word with me, which was melancholy. They said he was watching it. He wasn't enjoying the coverage. It was absolutely the weight of it hitting him, as we reported earlier here, David. He's been talking to many people and doing a phrase that I know John Carl has also heard Donald Trump does with people when he's not sure, and that is, what do you think of this? How is this playing? What's the coverage like? How is this going to move forward for me? And that is something Donald Trump does where, quite frankly, Donald Trump himself is not sure how this is going.
And you know, John, better than anyone, any of us who've ever interviewed the former president, and that's all of us here at this desk over the course of many years here. Those are the kinds of questions he'll ask us as reporters, too. How's this playing? What are the polls saying? What did you think of that speech last night? And even though we're reporters and we move on to the next question, he'll ask that kind of thing anyway. But I wanted to ask you, John Santucci, why the addition of Todd Blanche? We gather it's to beef up the legal team, but have the insiders within the Trump team explained to you that addition in the last 24 hours?
They've explained to me, David, that they needed a heavy hitter. They needed somebody that had dealt with a tough situation before. And as we reported here, Todd Blanche is one of the few lawyers that's still within the Trump orbit that went up against one of the toughest fights Donald Trump and his allies have had, and that is special counsel Robert Mueller. I'm told that within the last couple of days, Todd Blanche got a high marks, if you will, from a former client. And that was Paul Manafort, the former chairman of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. And Manafort had said in that conversation to Donald Trump, Todd Blanche was the one that made this better. And that is very clearly something that the president reacted to and recognizes right now, David, he needs someone that can make this situation just a little bit better.
Of course, Paul Manafort, the one-time chairman of the campaign, a convicted felon now, but defended by Mr. Blanche, who now will defend the former president, John.
And an indication of what you're saying is that Trump reaches out to everybody on this. He polls people. This is why anybody can be a senior advisor to Donald Trump. He asks his valet questions. He asks whoever is in the room. Another person he's been very much in touch with throughout this process is Steve Bannon, who, of course, was the chief strategist
charges. This indictment remains sealed at this hour. They will learn the charges first. Obviously, ABC News has been reporting that sources have told us at least 24 charges, separate counts in this case. That number could, of course, be higher. We're being very careful with our reporting and what exactly is in the indictment. Obviously, we simply do not know. There have been many who have asked, does Alvin Bragg, the DA in this case, have any surprises up his sleeve? This is an image of the former president leaving Trump Tower earlier today, a wave to the crowd, a fist bump to the crowd. It was very quick, and in fact, if you glanced away, you missed it. Then taken in the motorcade down to Lower Manhattan. There have been questions about whether or not he'd take Fifth Avenue here in New York. Anyone who's been to New York, or even if you haven't, you know Fifth Avenue, that's where Trump Tower is. They didn't take that route in the end. They went down the FDR, the highway that is just along the East River with the motorcade. Traffic cleared, pedestrians for the most part cleared all over the city. An extraordinary security presence that Pierre Thomas has been reporting on here this morning. Lindsay Davis reporting that those who had gathered outside Trump Tower today were in large part tourists who come to the city. And of course, Trump Tower has become a very familiar stop if you're a visitor in this city. Many of those tourists simply picking this perhaps Easter week with the holiday approaching to bring their family here to visit. And again, they won't forget their timing on this one, given what they've witnessed play out here in New York. The reason we have our camera trained on this particular location, for those of you who might just be joining us, is the fact that the former president will be brought upstairs to the 15th floor at any moment. He'll appear before Judge Juan Merchan here momentarily. That's when he'll learn of the charges. There had been some question about whether or not in the courtroom you would actually hear from former President Trump, not us, because there are no television cameras in court, but whether or not Donald Trump would speak himself. Catherine Falder is getting some indication that the former president does, in fact, plan to plead not guilty himself, not through his lawyers, but himself. And of course, we'll have to wait and see if that comes to fruition. There had also been some questions about whether or not Donald Trump would approach the cameras, take advantage of any opportunity as he got out of the motorcade in Lower Manhattan. Simply did not do that. And whether or not that was a decision made in the moment, we'll certainly report out as the day wears on. We do know that as of right now, there are plans for the former president to speak later today when he flies back to Florida, to Mar-a-Lago, to address reporters there in Florida. The hallway getting very quiet here. I don't know if that's an indication as to whether or not we could see the former president at any moment as he makes his way into that courtroom. And again, Dan Abrams, he'll face Judge Juan Merchan, who is very familiar with the former president and his family business, given the fact that he's presided over a case that gave very intimate details.
Yep, and we've talked about the fact that the ABC News reporting is that there will be, numerous counts here, right, over 24, et cetera. But that doesn't mean it's over 24 sort of incidents it's stemming from,
They
right?
can be very similar.
Correct. It could be numerous counts stemming from 1 or 2 incidents of falsifying a business record once on this, and then in a separate place, and then in another place, et cetera. And so that's where you could see the stacking of the charges with regard to each falsification potentially of a business record, even if they stem from the same incident or incidents.
And of course, there have also been questions about whether or not, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, about whether or not this indictment would include misdemeanors and felonies. I know some outlets have gone ahead and reported, according to sources, that there will be some felony counts inside this indictment. We simply do not know for sure until we see what's in this indictment, and we will find out after the defendant learns what's in the indictment. And in this case, as we've been reporting out here, the history today is that defendant is a former president, something we simply have not seen before. What do you expect from the judge, Kate?